They sent a ghost to hunt a phantom. And when the commander, blinded by pride, tried to break her, he broke his command instead. He saw a technician. The mountain saw a master. He heard silence. She heard the bedrock sing a song of war. In the end, he was just a man shouting at a storm, and she was the quiet center from which the lightning struck. The air in Station Argent was a composite fluid, thick with the recycled breath of 50 souls, the ozone tang of overworked electronics, and the faint mineral scent of deep earth. It was a smell specialist Kai had cataloged in her first hour. Humidity, 68%, a constant battle against the cold seep of the mountain. Barometric pressure, stable, but the low-frequency resonance humming through the station's titanium struts suggested a shift in the tectonic plate far below. She felt it not as a vibration, but as a pressure behind the eyes, a fundamental disquiet in the bone. The station was an anomaly, a high-tech nerve ganglion buried 700 meters deep in the Chugach Mountains of Alaska, a place where the Earth's magnetic field was notoriously fickle, and the silence was a coiled thing, waiting. Her workspace was an alcove, tucked away from the frantic energy of the main operations floor. It was a space defined not by rank or function, but by its deliberate isolation. 2 monitors displayed cascading lines of data, one a raw feed from the station's distributed seismic sensors, the other a complex 3-dimensional topographical map she had built herself. It was a model of the surrounding bathymetry and geology, rendered in gradients of blue and gray. On a small, cleared space on her desk sat a single rock. It was a piece of schist, laced with quartz and garnet, its layers compressed by millennia of unimaginable pressure. She would pick it up sometimes, feeling its weight, its texture, the sharp coolness of its planes. It was a data point. Everything was a data point. Her job, as defined by the vague and classified directive that had deposited her here, was to understand the environmental substrate, a term so broad as to be meaningless to most. To Kai, it was everything. She was not listening to the ocean. She was listening to the world that contained it. The operations floor was a tiered amphitheater of glowing screens and quiet tension. Men and women in crisp naval uniforms monitored sonar feeds, satellite uplinks, and encrypted communication channels. Their focus was outward, on the vast, cold expanse of the Gulf of Alaska. They were hunters, their senses extended by billions of dollars of technology, searching for the telltale acoustic signatures of foreign submersibles. They were the tip of the spear. Kai, in her sterile gray fatigues that bore no insignia, no name, only a simple barcode, was something else entirely. She was the hand that steadied the shaft, ensuring it was aimed from solid ground. Most of the crew ignored her. She was a temporary fixture, a civilian contractor or a low-level analyst on some obscure research project. She looked young, her features sharp and still, her dark hair pulled back in a severe functional knot. She moved with a liquid economy of motion and spoke only when a direct query required a factual response. She was ignorable. That stasis was shattered by the arrival of Lieutenant Commander Thorne. He did not walk onto the ops floor. He occupied it, his voice a blunt instrument that carved through the delicate ecosystem of focused silence. He was a large man, made larger by the rigid posture of someone acutely aware of his own rank. His face was florid, a testament to a temper he likely viewed as a leadership tool. He moved with the heavy certainty of a man who had never been told he was wrong, or at least had never listened. He was the station's new commanding officer, and he made it his first priority to inspect every screen, every station, every face, searching for deviations from the regulations he had memorized. "Report," he boomed at the watch officer, a young lieutenant named Calloway, whose spine seemed to stiffen into a rod of pure anxiety. Calloway rattled off the current status. All channels clear, sonar sweeps negative, system integrity at 100%. The litany of normality. Thorne grunted, his eyes sweeping the room, hungry for a flaw. His gaze snagged on Kai's alcove. It was an untidy corner in his otherwise immaculate universe, a pocket of incomprehensible data that did not fit the neat columns of his naval worldview. He strode toward it, his boots striking the grated floor with aggressive finality. "And what is this?" Thorne's voice was laced with a theatrical disdain. He gestured at her screens, at the oscillating lines of seismic data that looked like a patient in cardiac arrest. "Some kind of geology project?" Kai did not turn immediately. Her focus was on a subtle anomaly in the data stream from sensor package Delta 7, a microfracture event at a depth of 2 kilometers. It was trivial, but it was part of a pattern she had been mapping for 3 weeks. The pattern was a language, and she was slowly building its lexicon. Only when the data point was logged and cross-referenced did she swivel in her chair, her expression unreadable. "It is a component of the environmental substrate analysis, Commander," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. It was a statement of fact, offered without deference or challenge. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He picked up the piece of schist from her desk, turning it over in his thick fingers as if it were a piece of alien refuse. "Substrate analysis," he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "This command's mission is to hunt submarines, Specialist, not to collect rocks. Our eyes are on the water, not the dirt beneath it. Is that clear?" The title Specialist was a guess on his part, and a dismissive one. A catch-all for civilian weirdos and technical aides who did not fit into the clean lines of his chain of command. "The water is contained by the geology, Commander. The acoustic properties of the water are influenced by the resonant frequencies of the seabed and the surrounding continental shelf. They are not separate systems," Kai stated. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her certainty was absolute, a physical constant in a room suddenly fluctuating with emotion. He scoffed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He placed the rock back on her desk with a deliberate loud click. "This is a war-fighting facility, not a university. I want actionable intelligence, not academic theories. Your project is a waste of bandwidth and resources. Consolidate your work. I'll be reviewing its operational relevance within 48 hours. If I don't see a direct and immediate contribution to our mission, I'm shutting it down and reallocating this space for a tactical plotting table. We need more room for men who actually fight." He turned on his heel and marched away, leaving a wake of stunned silence. He had drawn his line in the sand. He had established his authority. Kai watched him go, her gaze calm, analytical. She had already cataloged him: threat vector, internal, motivation, ego, insecurity masked by aggression, probability of rational discourse, negligible. She turned back to her screen. The microfracture event in Delta 7 was followed by another, infinitesimally small tremor. The pattern was accelerating. The mountain was starting to speak more quickly. She let out a slow, controlled breath, the scent of ozone and rock filling her lungs. The commander was a variable, a noisy, unpredictable one, but the mountain, the deep, patient earth, was a constant, and it was telling her something was coming. The next 24 hours were a study in escalating friction. Thorne patrolled the ops floor like a caged predator, his voice a constant grating presence. He demanded reports on the half-hour, questioned standard procedures, and critiqued the posture of his subordinates. He was a man performing the role of commander, every action a self-conscious display of power. He made a point of repeatedly walking past Kai's alcove, each time casting a look of profound irritation at her screens of dancing, chaotic lines. He saw them as an affront, a personal insult to the order he was trying to impose. Kai, for her part, remained a fixed point of stillness in his manufactured storm. Her focus did not waver. She ate her rations at her desk, her eyes never leaving the data feeds. The seismic activity was increasing in complexity. It was no longer a simple pattern of stress and release. Something new was being introduced into the system. A low-frequency, rhythmic pulse had appeared, originating far out in the abyssal plain and propagating not through the water, but through the bedrock itself. It was incredibly faint, a whisper buried beneath the groans of the tectonic plate. To the station's primary sonar arrays, it was nothing, just a ghost in the background noise, automatically filtered out by standard algorithms. To Kai, it was a voice. She began to build a new filter, writing code with a speed and fluency that was mesmerizing. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, not with the frantic pecking of a technician, but with the fluid grace of a musician. She was isolating the new frequency, amplifying it, stripping away the geological noise. Petty Officer Reyes, the lead comms technician, watched her from his station. He was a young man, but his eyes were old with the experience of watching systems live and die. He understood signal processing better than anyone on the crew, and what he saw her doing was, by his estimation, impossible. She was not just filtering a signal, she was teaching the system to recognize a new physical law. "What is that, specialist?" Reyes asked, his voice low, respectful. He had approached her alcove during a rare lull. Kai paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. She pointed to a thin, almost invisible sine wave now isolated on her screen. "It's a signal, amplitude modulated, extremely low frequency. It's using the basalt layer of the oceanic crust as a transmission medium." Reyes frowned, leaning closer. His own systems were designed for hydroacoustics, for sound traveling through water. "Through the rock? The attenuation would be massive. You'd need a power source the size of a city to send a signal more than a few clicks. Unless the signal is designed to resonate with the specific crystalline structure of the rock," Kai replied, her eyes returning to the code. "If you match the resonant frequency of the medium, the attenuation becomes negligible. You don't have to shout through the rock. You just have to hum the right tune. The rock itself carries the signal for you." Reyes stared, first at the screen, then at her. The concept was so far outside of his operational parameters that it bordered on science fiction. But the signal was there. She had pulled a ghost from the machine. He saw the cold, hard logic in her display, and it was more compelling than the commander's blustering confidence. "Can you track its source?" he asked. "Not with this equipment," she said simply. "The station's sensors are designed to listen to the water. I'm piggybacking on their seismic side chatter. It's like trying to read a newspaper through a wall by listening to the rustle of the pages. I can tell a page is being turned, but I can't read the words." It was then that Thorne chose to make his next stand. He had seen Reyes speaking with Kai, a subordinate engaging with the anomaly he had marked for extinction. He saw it as a challenge to his authority. He stormed over, his face a mask of thunder. "Petty Officer Reyes, do you have a reason for abandoning your post?" Reyes straightened up instantly. "No, Commander. I was just asking the specialist about a signal anomaly." Thorne's eyes flicked to Kai's screen, to the pure, clean sine wave she had so painstakingly excavated from the noise. He did not see a breakthrough. He saw defiance. "I gave you an order, Specialist," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I told you to consolidate your work for review. Instead, you seem to be doubling down on this fantasy. You are distracting my personnel with this geological nonsense." Kai met his gaze. Her own was as placid as a frozen lake. "The signal is not geological, Commander. It is artificial." "Artificial?" Thorne let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "And what is it broadcasting? The evening news for the crabs?" "This is over. I'm not waiting 48 hours. Shut it down. Now." He pointed a thick finger at her primary monitor. "That screen is to be repurposed for tactical display. Effective immediately. Your access to the seismic network is terminated. Is that understood?" This was the public confrontation, the deliberate act of humiliation designed to break her and reestablish his dominance. The entire ops floor had gone silent, all eyes fixed on the small alcove. This was not a disagreement about procedure. It was a raw contest of wills. Kai's response was to turn back to her keyboard. She typed a single line of code and hit enter. The complex seismic display on her left monitor vanished, replaced by a simple black screen with a single line of white text. "Seismic feed access terminated by user." She then swiveled her chair back to face him. "Your order is understood, Commander," she said. There was no anger in her voice, no fear, no insubordination, just the flat, cold echo of compliance. She had followed his order to the letter, but in doing so, she had somehow nullified his victory. Her calm was a mirror, reflecting his own rage back at him, amplifying it. He stood there, momentarily wrong-footed. He had expected an argument, a protest, something he could crush. The quiet, absolute obedience was more infuriating than open rebellion. It made his outburst seem childish, his authority hollow. He clenched his fists, his face turning a shade darker. "Good," he bit out. "Now get your personal effects out of here. I want this space cleared in 5 minutes." He turned and stalked back to the command chair in the center of the room, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on him. He had won the battle, but the quiet specialist had somehow made him feel like the loser. Kai simply nodded, her expression unchanged. She unplugged her personal datapad, a ruggedized military spec tablet, and carefully placed the piece of schist into a pocket of her fatigues. She did not look at Reyes or anyone else. She gathered her few belongings and walked from the ops floor, her footsteps making no sound. She left behind a vacuum, a pocket of silence where her intense, focused energy had been. And on the main command screen, the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific seemed to mock them with its placid, unreadable face. The hunt was on, but Commander Thorne had just deliberately blinded one of his best hounds, convinced it was a useless stray. The silence she left was heavier than the commander's shouting had ever been. The crisis arrived exactly 7 hours later, not with a bang, but with a whisper that screamed. It began at the sonar station manned by a young petty officer with the sharpest ears on the crew. "Khan, sonar," he said, his voice tight with confusion. "I have something, but it's not right." Thorne leaned forward in his command chair. "Report, sonar. What do you have?" Sir, I have a transient acoustic anomaly. Bearing 090. It's a cavitation spike. Looked like a propeller starting to spin up, but then it just vanished. No Doppler shift, no engine noise, no flow noise. Just the spike, then nothing, like it was never there. A biological, a whale breaking surface? Thorne suggested, his tone dismissive. He hated ambiguity. Negative, Commander. The signature was mechanical, and it was deep, 500 meters, but the system can't hold a track. It's like trying to grab smoke. Then another station reported in. Con, EW. I registered a faint magnetic signature fluctuation, same bearing. Lasted less than a second. It was within the parameters of a submerged metallic object, but it was masked, cloaked by the background geologic magnetism. It shouldn't be possible. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle the edges of the room's professional calm. 2 different sensor systems had detected the ghost of a contact, but neither could resolve it. It was a predator that had mastered the art of invisibility. Thorne's face hardened. This was a direct threat, a challenge to his station, his command. His response was immediate and by the book. All stations, active search pattern, sector 085 to 095. Full power to the primary array. I want to light up that entire quadrant. If there's something out there, we're going to burn it out of the water. Petty Officer Reyes, monitoring the power distribution, flinched. Commander, full power on the primary array will cause significant signal distortion. The thermocline layers in that sector are already playing havoc with propagation. Pushing that much energy into the water will just create more noise. We'll be deafening ourselves. Thorne's head snapped toward him. Are you questioning my order, Petty Officer? No, sir. I'm advising you of the probable consequences from a technical standpoint, Reyes said, his voice steady despite the glare from the commander. He believed in the data, and the data said Thorne's plan was wrong. Then keep your technical standpoint to yourself and execute the order, Thorne snarled. I am in command here. Reyes swallowed, his hands moving to the console. He rerouted the power, and a deep, powerful hum filled the station as the main sonar array energized to its maximum output. On the main screen, the tranquil blue of the tactical display flooded with a chaotic wash of white noise and false returns. Streaks of color and ghost images bloomed and died across the quadrant. It was a digital blizzard, a self-inflicted blindness. Thorne had, as Reyes predicted, deafened them. He was staring at the storm of data, his jaw tight, willing a clean contact to emerge from the chaos he had created. It was then that the first impact came. It was not an explosion. It was a sharp, violent concussion that slammed through the station, throwing men from their chairs. Red lights flared on a damage control board. Hull breach, Sector Gamma! We've been hit! Someone yelled. The station groaned, the sound of stressed metal echoing through the corridors. They had been fired upon by a target they could not see, from a position they could not identify. The ghost was real, and it had teeth. Thorne was on his feet, his face pale. Damage control teams, deploy! Sonar, where did that come from? Give me a firing solution. The sonar chief's voice was strained, bordering on frantic. I can't, sir. There's nothing there. The array is saturated. It's all just noise. The torpedo. It must have been a wire-guided launch from close range, but we never saw the parent vessel. They were blind, crippled, and under attack. The enemy was inside their sensor perimeter, moving with impunity. Thorne's orthodox brute force method had not only failed, it had made them a bigger, brighter, and more vulnerable target. The high-energy pulse from their own sonar was a lighthouse, guiding the enemy's torpedoes home. He stood frozen in the center of his chaotic command floor, his authority stripped away not by a rival, but by the undeniable reality of his own catastrophic failure. The silence that followed the impact report was filled with the low hum of failing systems and the ragged sound of fearful breathing. The commander had no more orders to give. He had run out of pages in his book. Into that vacuum of leadership, a single quiet voice spoke from the entryway to the ops floor. "The torpedo did not follow your sonar pulse, Commander. It followed the resonant frequency of the station's power conduit." Every head turned. Kai stood there, her ruggedized data pad in one hand, the piece of schist in the other. Her face was a mask of calm analysis, her eyes sweeping over the damage reports and the panicked faces with the detached air of a physician diagnosing a patient. She had not been ordered back. She had simply returned when the first tremor of the impact had reached her quarters. It was a data point she could not ignore. Thorne stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. His command was collapsing, and the woman he had publicly humiliated was standing there, speaking of resonant frequencies. "What are you talking about? Get off my bridge!" he roared, his voice cracking with strain. "It is not your bridge anymore, Commander," Kai stated, her voice cutting through his anger like a scalpel. "It is a target. The enemy is not using acoustics to navigate. They are using geophysics. They felt the spike in your power draw not as a sound in the water, but as a vibration in the bedrock. You did not light them up. You gave them a tuning fork to follow." She walked past him, her steps measured and deliberate, and moved toward her old alcove. The monitor she had blanked was still dark. The space was empty, as he had commanded. It was in this moment that the pressure on Thorne finally broke him. His entire world, built on the rigid pillars of rank, protocol, and unquestionable authority, had crumbled in minutes. He saw Kai not as a savior, but as the architect of his humiliation, the smug embodiment of his failure. All his frustration, fear, and rage coalesced into a single, desperate act of physical assertion. He moved to intercept her, grabbing her by the arm as she passed. "I gave you an order!" he bellowed, his face inches from hers, his grip like a vice. It was the swing, the clumsy physical attempt to impose the dominance his rank no longer afforded him. Kai did not flinch. She did not struggle. She simply stopped, her body going perfectly still. She slowly turned her head to look first at his thick fingers clamped around her bicep, then up at his contorted face. Her eyes were not angry. They were not frightened. They were clinical. They were the eyes of an entomologist studying a particularly predictable insect. "Commander," she said, and her voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. "A second torpedo is inbound. Its estimated time to impact is 94 seconds. You can either maintain your grip on my arm, or you can watch us die. The choice is yours, but I advise you to make it quickly." His grip loosened. The sheer, unshakable certainty in her voice, the cold, hard data of their impending deaths, shattered the last of his rage, leaving only hollow shock. He stumbled back, his hand falling away as if her arm had been red hot. He had swung, and he had missed, hitting nothing but the solid wall of her competence. He was irrelevant. Kai did not spare him another glance. Authority did not need to be seized. In a crisis, it flows naturally to the one with a solution. She reached her former station and looked at Petty Officer Reyes. "Reyes," she said, her voice now crisp with command. I need you to bypass the main array's safeties. Reroute all auxiliary power from life support and non-essential systems to the seismic sensor network. And I need a direct, hardline interface to this console, now. For a heartbeat, the room remained frozen. Thorne stood, defeated. The crew looked from their failed commander to the quiet woman in the gray fatigues. It was Reyes who broke the spell. He had seen her work. He had seen the ghost in the machine she had found. He believed the data. Yes, specialist, he said, his voice clear and firm. He turned to his console, his fingers flying, already executing her commands. Bypassing safeties now, rerouting auxiliary power. His compliance was the dam breaking. One by one, other technicians turned to her, their faces filled with a desperate hope. What do you need, specialist? The EW officer asked. What's the plan? Kai plugged her datapad into the port Reyes had just activated. A complex, three-dimensional model of the mountain range bloomed onto the once blank screen. It was her model, but now it was alive, pulsing with the raw, amplified data from the seismic sensors. The plan, she said, her eyes fixed on the display, is to stop listening to the water and start listening to the mountain. The enemy is in the walls of our house. We are going to turn the walls into a weapon. The turn was complete. Command had been transferred not by regulation, but by necessity. Kai was in control, and she had less than 80 seconds to save them all. The enemy vessel isn't moving through the water in a conventional sense, Kai explained, her voice a calm, steady river in the torrent of fear that filled the room. Her fingers danced across the interface of her datapad, her custom software now integrated with the station's core systems. The 3D map of the mountain range on her screen was no longer a static image. It was a living, breathing entity, glowing with 1,000 points of light, representing the seismic sensors she now commanded. They are using a form of acoustic camouflage that relies on a phase cancellation resonance. They broadcast a signal that is the precise inverse of their own acoustic signature, effectively erasing themselves from the hydroacoustic spectrum. But that process, the generation of that much focused energy, has a byproduct. She highlighted a series of rhythmic, almost imperceptible pulses on the display. They were the same pulses she had tracked earlier, now massively amplified by the rerouted power. It creates a tertiary vibration, a lithic resonance that propagates through the bedrock. They think it's just meaningless noise, lost in the natural groaning of the earth. But it's a fingerprint, a very, very clear one. Reyes, working beside her, patched in the last of the power conduits. The lights on the ops floor dimmed as non-essential systems went dark, shunting every available watt to Kai's project. A low, powerful hum vibrated through the deck plates. Power is at 120% of network capacity, specialist, he reported. The sensors are screaming, but they're holding. Time to impact? Kai asked without looking up. 50 seconds, the tactical officer called out, his voice tight. Good, we have time, she said. The statement was so absurdly calm, it bordered on surreal, but it had a profound effect. It injected a sliver of impossible hope into the doomed room. The first torpedo followed the resonant frequency of our primary power conduit, a simple, brute force signal. The second will be more sophisticated. It will be listening for the high-frequency signature of our Combat Information Center's processing cores. It is aiming for the brain. She isolated a new frequency on her display, a complex, layered signal propagating through the rock from a point approximately 3 kilometers away. It was the enemy sub, communicating with its inbound weapon, making final course corrections. "They are talking to it," she murmured. "Good." Her strategy was elegant in its audacity. It was not about defense. It was about misdirection and offense, executed on a scale that was geological. "Reyes, I need you to create a feedback loop. Isolate the frequency of the enemy's command signal. I am going to piggyback on it. We are not going to jam it. We are going to become it." Reyes's eyes widened as he understood. It was a move from the darkest corners of the electronic warfare playbook. "You're going to spoof their own command signal?" "More than that," Kai said. "I'm going to modulate it. I've been mapping the resonant frequencies of every major quartz deposit and fault line in this mountain for the last 3 weeks. We are going to use their own command signal to turn this entire mountain range into a massive, focused acoustic amplifier." Her fingers flew, writing a new algorithm on the fly. It was a piece of malicious code that would be carried on the enemy's own frequency. It would not try to give the torpedo new coordinates. Instead, it would instruct the torpedo's guidance system to listen for a new, irresistible signal. A signal Kai was about to create. "Time? 30 seconds. Reyes, now, inject the code." Reyes hit the command. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, on Kai's display, the enemy's command signal flickered, its waveform subtly altering. "Code is injected," Reyes confirmed, his voice hushed in awe. "They've accepted the packet. They think it's a standard handshake." "Now for the bait," Kai whispered. She brought up a new command line on her screen. She was no longer a geologist or a signal analyst. She was a composer, and her orchestra was a mountain. She had identified a massive, unstable crystalline quartz formation 300 meters above the enemy submarine's last known position. Its natural resonant frequency was 12.7 hertz, a deep, subsonic pulse. "I'm going to send a single, focused acoustic pulse from our seismic network, tuned to precisely 12.7 hertz, targeted at that quartz deposit," she announced to the room. "The deposit will resonate, amplifying the pulse 1,000-fold. My code has told the inbound torpedo that this new, overwhelming resonant signature is the true target. The signal from our CIC was the whisper. This will be the shout." 20 seconds! "But what about the sub?" the EW officer asked. "Won't they hear it?" "They will," Kai said, a flicker of something cold and final in her eyes. "And at that frequency and that amplitude, the resonance will do more than just make noise. It will create a sympathetic vibration inside their hull. It will shake them apart from the inside out." She was not just diverting a torpedo. She was setting a trap, using the enemy's own weapon as the bait and the mountain itself as the executioner. It was a checkmate move, conceived in minutes and executed with the cold precision of a law of physics. 10 seconds, Kai's hand hovered over the final command prompt. The room held its breath. The only sounds were the hum of the overloaded network and the frantic ticking of the clock. Thorne stood alone near the command chair, a ghost at his own execution, watching a power he could not comprehend, wielded by a woman he had tried to destroy. 5, 4, 3. Kai hit enter. "Pulse away," she said. For 2 eternal seconds, there was only silence. A profound, absolute quiet, where every soul in the room was suspended between life and death. Then it came. It was not a sound they heard with their ears, but a feeling, a deep, shuddering vibration that seemed to pass through the station, through their bones, through their very teeth. It was the mountain, singing its terrible song. on the tactical display that was slave to her system, two things happened at once. The icon representing the inbound torpedo, which had been on a direct course for the station, made an impossible, instantaneous 90-degree turn, accelerating upward. At the same time, the location of the enemy submarine, which Kai had marked with a faint, predictive red circle, bloomed into a chaotic starburst of seismic energy. A new voice, strained but triumphant, cut through the tension. "Con, sonar, I have it. I have a massive acoustic event. It's not an explosion. It's a structural collapse, a pressure hull imploding, bearing 091, range 3 kilometers. It's the ghost. We got it." Simultaneously, another report came in. "The torpedo, it just detonated. It struck the seabed directly above the contact. The whole sea floor is coming apart." The threat was gone. Both of them, the inbound weapon and the invisible predator that had launched it, were annihilated, not by an explosive countermeasure, but by a perfectly tuned note. The enemy had been killed by physics. The ops floor erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective, shuddering gasp of disbelief and relief. Men and women slumped over their consoles, their bodies finally succumbing to the adrenaline and terror. They were alive. They were alive because of the quiet woman in the gray fatigues. In the center of it all, Kai stood, her expression unchanged. She watched the cascading data on her screen, confirming the kill. The enemy submarine was a cloud of debris and a fading thermal signature. The secondary seismic shocks were dissipating. The mountain was falling silent again. She typed one final command, and the power rerouted back to the station's life support and primary systems. The lights returned to their normal brightness. Her screen went back to displaying the calm, steady lines of the Earth's natural state. Her work was done. A profound silence descended, different from the one before. It was not the silence of fear, but of awe. Every eye was on Kai. They looked at her not as a specialist, or a contractor, or a weird geologist. They looked at her as the architect of a miracle. She had not just saved them, she had redefined the very nature of their reality. The war was not just in the water. It was in the rock, in the air, in the very fabric of the world, and she was the only one who knew how to read the battlefield. She turned from the console, her job complete, and saw 50 faces staring at her, their expressions a mixture of gratitude, fear, and utter reverence. And in the corner, a broken commander stared at the floor, his world utterly and irrevocably dismantled. The aftermath was a strange, muted affair. The immediate, life-threatening danger was gone, but the station was still a wounded animal. Damage control teams moved with quiet efficiency, patching the torpedo-damaged sector. The crew on the ops floor worked to restore full functionality, but their movements were different. The frantic edge was gone, replaced by a subdued, focused calm. The hierarchy of the room had been permanently altered. No one looked to Thorne for orders. His presence had become an embarrassment, a monument to a failed philosophy. He sat in his command chair, but he was no longer in command. He was just a man occupying a space. It was an hour after the event that the call came. The encrypted channel, reserved for the highest echelons of Fleet Command, chimed once. The communications officer, a young ensign, looked at Thorne, then at Kai, his uncertainty plain. "Commander, it's Fleet Command. Line secure for you." Thorne flinched, as if the words themselves were a physical blow. He knew what this was. He reached for the receiver, his hand trembling slightly. Before he could speak, Kai stepped forward. "I will take it," she said. It was not a request. The ensign, without hesitation, rerouted the call to a speaker so the entire bridge could hear. He recognized true authority when he saw it. A woman's voice, crisp and severe, with an accent that hinted at Eastern European origins, filled the room. "This is Captain Rostova, Strategic Analysis Division. Report status of Station Argent." Thorn opened his mouth to speak, to salvage some shred of his position, but the voice cut him off before he could form a word. "I was not addressing you, Lieutenant Commander Thorn. I was addressing my asset, Specialist Kai. Report." The revelation landed with the force of a second impact. My asset. The words recontextualized everything. Kai was not a contractor. She was not a low-level researcher. She was a planted operative, an agent of a division so high-level most of the crew had never even heard of it. Kai stepped up to the main console, her posture unchanged. "Captain Rostova," she began, her voice the same flat, factual instrument it had always been. "Station Argent sustained one torpedo impact, resulting in minor hull damage to a non-critical sector. No casualties. The attacking vessel, a new class of submersible employing geoacoustic cloaking, has been neutralized. The threat is eliminated. The station is secure." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Neutralized," Captain Rostova repeated, the word heavy with meaning. "Our intelligence suggested that vessel was undetectable by conventional means." "How did you accomplish this, Kai?" "I repurposed the station's seismic sensor network to create a geophonic tracking system," Kai explained, as if describing how to make a cup of coffee. "I used a targeted, resonant pulse to trigger a sympathetic vibration within the enemy's hull, causing catastrophic structural failure. The vessel's own inbound ordnance was diverted to confirm the kill." Another, longer silence. The entire crew of Station Argent listened, mesmerized, as their impossible salvation was described in a few clinically precise sentences. Captain Rostova's voice, when it returned, had lost some of its metallic edge, replaced by something that sounded like profound satisfaction. "You turned a mountain into a weapon. Of course you did. That is why I sent you there." Then, the captain's tone hardened again, turning its focus like a searchlight. "Lieutenant Commander Thorn." Thorn stood up, his body rigid. "Yes, Captain," he managed, his voice a dry rasp. "I have the full log from Station Argent. I have read the reports of your performance. I have read the transcript of your interactions with my asset. You had the single most advanced unconventional warfare analyst on the planet at your disposal, and you ordered her to collect her personal effects and clear out her workspace. You prioritized a tactical plotting table over a solution that saved your command and your life. You are a testament to the fact that rank is a measure of position, not competence. You are relieved of command, effective immediately. A transport will be there in 6 hours to escort you to your debriefing. I suggest you have your bags packed." The sentence was delivered without emotion, a final, crushing judgment. It was the formal execution of a man who was already professionally dead. Thorn did not argue. He did not protest. He simply said, "Yes, Captain," his voice barely a whisper. He turned, his face ashen, and walked off the ops floor for the last time, a man erased from his own story. The catharsis was not loud or celebratory. It was a quiet, collective sigh of relief, the restoration of a natural order where competence, not ego, was king. Captain Rostova's voice came back over the speaker. "Petty Officer Reyes." Reyes jumped, startled to be addressed. "Yes, Captain." The logs show you were the first to recognize Specialist Kai's value and the first to follow her orders when the command structure failed. You chose logic over a flawed hierarchy. That has been noted. You have a future in this Navy. The validation was a quiet, powerful reward. Kai, Rostova continued, your work there is done. The transport will bring your replacement. Get some rest. Understood, Captain, Kai replied. The line went dead. A new order had been established. The quiet, methodical rhythm of the station returned, but it was different now. It was centered around a new pole star. The crew looked at Kai with a reverence that bordered on fear. She was not one of them. She was something other, a force of nature in human form. She showed no pleasure in her victory, no satisfaction in Thorne's downfall. The events were merely data points in a completed mission. She returned to her alcove, where her primary monitor now displayed the calm, blue tactical map once more. For her, it was already over. She was simply waiting for the next deployment, the next impossible problem. Later, as the watch shift was changing, Petty Officer Reyes approached her alcove. He did not come with praise or thanks. He came with a question. He held out a steaming mug. Coffee specialist? He asked, his voice quiet. Kai looked up from her screen and took the mug. Thank you, Reyes. The feedback loop, Reyes said, getting to the real reason for his visit. When you injected your code into their command stream, you didn't just tell the torpedo to listen for the quartz resonance. You told it the quartz resonance was the command stream, didn't you? You made it deaf to its own masters. Kai took a slow sip of the coffee. It was hot, black, and bitter, a good data point. The most effective way to defeat an enemy, she said, her voice low and even, is to make them an enemy of themselves. Their own system, their own logic, becomes the weapon that destroys them. I simply gave it a new, more compelling truth to follow. Reyes nodded slowly, absorbing the brutal elegance of it. He was not just getting a technical answer. He was getting a lesson in a philosophy of warfare that was as alien to him as the dark side of the moon. He was in the presence of a master, and the only appropriate response was to learn. Thank you, Specialist, he said, and left her to her silence. He understood now. She wasn't a ghost who had appeared among them. She was a ghost who had always been there, in the systems, in the logic, in the cold, hard facts that people like Thorne chose to ignore. 6 hours later, the transport arrived. A new lieutenant, a quiet, serious woman with intelligent eyes, took command of the station. Her first act was to walk to Kai's alcove and nod respectfully. They told me what you did, she said simply. The space is yours for as long as you need it. But Kai was already packed. Her data pad and the single piece of schist were her only luggage. She walked through the corridors of Station Argent, a place she had saved from annihilation, and no one spoke to her. They just watched her pass, their faces etched with an awe that would curdle into legend. They would tell the story for years, the story of the quiet woman who listened to the mountain, who commanded the bedrock, who defeated an invisible enemy with a whisper of physics. She boarded the transport without a backward glance, a solitary figure disappearing back into the vast, classified world from which she had come. She left behind a lesson etched into the very rock of the station, that true authority is not claimed, but earned, that the loudest voice in the room is often the most ignorant, and that in the silent spaces where the real work is done, there are masters who move unseen, holding the delicate balance of the world in their calm, capable hands. They do not seek glory, They do not seek recognition. They are the quiet professionals, the ghosts in the machine, and their only reward is the cold, clean beauty of a problem solved.